The wind screamed across Keflavik airfield, tearing through sheets of sleet that turned the runway into silver glass under the midnight floodlights. In the operations hut, Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Hart stood motionless beside the window, her gloved hand resting on the metal sill. She was 32, tall and lean from years of military discipline, her face sharp-edged, softened only by tired blue eyes that had seen too many men vanish into the Atlantic. Her brown hair, always tied in a precise bun, escaped slightly tonight, an imperfection she didn't notice. Evelyn had flown 42 missions over the North Atlantic, most of them hunting submarines that never appeared. But tonight, the radio chatter carried something different. A whisper about an entire German wolf pack moving unseen through the dark corridor, a patch of ocean radar seldom reached. Across the room, Lieutenant Julia Stone bent over the new radar console, its screen glowing like a pale moon. Julia was 23, short and slight, her dark curls perpetually tangled from sleepless nights. Her quick, clever fingers moved across the dials with near mathematical precision. A genius in radar technology, she had graduated from MIT before her peers had even finished college, yet her youth made commanding officers dismiss her insights as eccentricity. She frowned, her hazel eyes narrowing. "Commander, there's something here. A steady echo, 8 contacts, moving in formation." Evelyn turned, her voice calm but taut. "Are you certain it's not interference?" "Not unless weather moves in perfect convoy speed," Julia replied. The door burst open. Major Griffin, the base operations officer, entered with the careless arrogance of a man used to being right. A tall man in his 40s, with graying hair and a face carved by years of cold wind, Griffin radiated bureaucratic certainty. "Hart!" he barked. "Stand down. The signal's just ion interference. The last thing we need is another wild goose chase burning up fuel." Evelyn's jaw tightened. Griffin represented everything she despised about desk officers: safe, confident, and always ready to doubt. "Sir, the pattern's too organized to be noise," she said. "If we ignore this, and it's real, a convoy could be wiped out." He shrugged, lighting a cigarette. "Or maybe you just want to play hero again." The silence that followed was brittle. Julia looked away. She'd seen this before, Evelyn being punished for refusing to wait for permission. Evelyn's temper flared beneath her steady exterior, but she forced herself to stay composed. "If I'm wrong, I'll take full responsibility," she said. Griffin exhaled smoke through his nostrils, amusement flickering in his eyes. "You'll take the blame either way. That's how command works." Then he left, the door slamming shut behind him. Outside, the storm thickened. Snow and fog merged into one shifting wall of white. Evelyn stared at the radar again. The echoes pulsed with mechanical rhythm, like a heartbeat underwater. 8 submarines, Julia whispered. "If that's accurate, it's a wolf pack heading straight into the dark corridor." Evelyn made her decision. "Get the crew. We're taking off." Within 20 minutes, the B-24 Liberty Belle roared down the icy runway. The bomber, black-painted for night operations, carried the faint gleam of frost along its wings. Inside, the crew strapped in. Sergeant Nora Mitchell, tail gunner, and Corporal Ben Rowe, flight engineer. Nora, 27, wiry and sunburned despite Iceland's gray skies, wore a lucky silver locket under her flight jacket. She had joined the Air Corps after her brother's merchant ship was torpedoed by a U-boat 2 years earlier. Her smile was quick but fragile. Tonight, it didn't appear at all. "You sure this isn't suicide, ma'am?" she muttered through her intercom. Evelyn's voice came back steady. "If it is, we'll make it count." The plane rose into the storm. Inside the cockpit, condensation beaded on the glass like tears. Julia monitored the radar, her headphones crackling with static. Evelyn's mind turned inward, toward the weight of responsibility she could never shed. Each mission blurred into the next, a pattern of orders, maps, and empty seas. Yet tonight felt different. Something unseen tugged at her instincts, a premonition she couldn't name. Miles below, the ocean seethed under the same storm. Deep beneath the waves, Captain Ingrid Weiss stood inside the control room of U-412. She was 29, striking even under the dim red lights. Tall, angular, her blonde hair cropped close to fit beneath her cap. Her pale skin looked ghostly in the submarine's gloom, and her eyes, cold gray, analytical, rarely betrayed emotion. The daughter of a naval engineer, Ingrid had grown up beside shipyards, learning early that steel obeyed only precision. Yet the war had stripped her of illusions. She believed not in glory, but in control, the kind that could keep men alive beneath crushing tons of water. "Surface conditions?" she asked. Her second officer, Carl Reinhardt, young and broad-shouldered, checked the instruments. "Two storms converging, Captain. We can pass undetected if we maintain this course." Weiss nodded. "Good. The enemy will see nothing but noise." She studied the map. 8 submarines aligned across a 40-kilometer arc. "Operation Valkyrie," she murmured. "If we reach the convoy undetected, it will be the Reich's greatest victory in the Atlantic." Yet somewhere deep inside, beneath her professional composure, a quiet unease stirred. She'd lost too many men already, and her superiors demanded perfection. War no longer felt like destiny. It felt like arithmetic, and the numbers never favored survival. Hours passed. Above, the Liberty Belle pushed through the clouds, its engines rumbling like distant thunder. Julia's radar flickered again. Contact confirmed, bearing 041, distance 60 miles. Evelyn leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Hold altitude. Let's see if they break formation." Nora rotated the tail turret, scanning the endless dark. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sea below. Then, for an instant, metallic shadows moving beneath the surface. "I see them!" Nora's voice cracked in the intercom. "Submarines, multiple." Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Arm depth charges. Prepare for attack run." The bomber dove, slicing through fog. Julia called out distances, her voice tight with focus. Below, U-412's sonar officer shouted, "Aircraft overhead!" Weiss's command snapped through the compartment. "Crash dive! Engines full reverse!" The submarine lurched downward, alarms wailing. But it was too late for 2 of the other U-boats. Depth charges erupted in violent bursts, sending geysers of white water skyward. Through the periscope, Weiss saw the explosions and whispered, "Gott im Himmel!" On the Liberty Belle, the crew was silent as they watched debris rise through the storm. 2 kills confirmed, yet no one cheered. Evelyn's heart pounded not with triumph, but with dread. Somewhere below, survivors were trapped in the dark, and she had put them there. Julia looked at her commander, realizing that behind Evelyn's steady voice lay the loneliness of command, the burden of making death a routine. Weiss steadied herself as U-412 leveled off at 120 meters. The noise above faded. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the tremor of the ocean against the hull. "We are alive," she said quietly. But she knew it had cost her allies their lives. She made a silent vow. Next time, she would strike first. Above, Evelyn's bomber turned back toward base. The storm swallowed the sea again, hiding what it had witnessed. Evelyn looked out into the endless gray, feeling a strange, unshakable sense that someone down there had looked back. The dawn broke cold and metallic over the North Atlantic, the horizon a bruised line of silver and gray where sky met storm-tossed sea. The wind had not relented through the night, and the surface below looked like hammered steel, restless and endless. Inside the cockpit of the B-24 Liberty Belle, Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Hart squinted through the frosted canopy, her jaw set in quiet determination. Her gloved fingers gripped the yoke tightly, steadying the bomber as it rolled in the turbulent air. Beneath her calm exterior ran a pulse of tension she could not shake. The last few hours had been filled with silent expectation, the kind that clung to the air before every battle, an instinctual knowing that something irreversible was about to happen. At the radar console, Lieutenant Julia Stone adjusted the range filter, her brow furrowed. The dull hum of the ASV-3 system filled the fuselage. Then, abruptly, the noise changed. Steady pulses replaced erratic interference. She froze. "Commander," she whispered, leaning forward. "I've got them." Evelyn turned sharply. "Confirm." Julia's fingers flew across the controls, calibrating gain. The green blips on the screen moved with mechanical precision, 8 of them, spaced evenly apart, cutting through the void. Bearing 37 degrees, distance 42 miles, they're in formation, Wolfpack Valkyrie. Her voice trembled with both awe and fear. Evelyn's heart slammed once in her chest. The name itself carried weight. Allied intelligence had whispered about this elusive pack for months. "Prepare attack run," she said. In the tail turret, Sergeant Nora Mitchell adjusted her headset. Her eyes, steel gray and tired from too many night missions, scanned the dark sea. Her hands, calloused, precise, rested on the twin .50 caliber handles. Beneath her jacket, the locket she wore pressed against her collarbone, its tiny photograph of her brother, long faded from salt and sweat. She remembered his laughter, his letters from merchant service, and the telegram that ended it all. Torpedoed off Greenland, no survivors. Each mission since had been personal. When Evelyn's voice came over the intercom, "Target confirmed, Nora. Ready your guns?" She swallowed hard and whispered, "For you, Tom." On the engineer's deck, Corporal Ben Rowe checked the fuel lines. A compact man with dark stubble and oil-stained hands, Ben was the silent engine of the crew, reliable, methodical, rarely speaking unless spoken to. He had worked in Detroit before the war, building cars, dreaming of flying. Now he spent his days keeping planes alive long enough to come home. He heard the rising urgency in Julia's tone and muttered, "Here we go again." The Liberty Belle dropped to 4,000 feet, slicing through a corridor of fog. The sea below came into clearer view, vast, rippling, indifferent. Julia's radar screen pulsed faster. "Range closing, 15 miles. Evelyn steadied her breathing. "All right, girls," she said into the intercom, her voice low, calm, magnetic. "We strike before they dive. That's our only chance." Nora smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am." Far below, in the depths of the Atlantic, Captain Ingrid Weiss of the U-boat 412 stood at the chart table, tracing coordinates with a gloved finger. Her uniform, tailored but worn at the seams, smelled faintly of diesel and salt. She had barely slept. The submarine rocked slightly, the sound of waves muffled against steel. Her face, illuminated by the dim red glow of the control room, was pale but resolute. Her gray eyes betrayed calculation, not fear. "Report," she said. Her executive officer, Oberleutnant Rolf Adler, stepped forward. He was 30, tall and broad-shouldered, with sandy hair and a quiet confidence that steadied the men. His hands were rough from years at sea, his voice low and even. "Weather clear to the north. Convoy intercept in 6 hours if we maintain speed." Weiss looked up at him, longer than protocol required. Rolf had been with her since training, a man she trusted completely. Their bond went beyond command. In the dark isolation of the Atlantic, affection had found a way to exist, though it had never been spoken aloud. His smile, when it came, was rare and small. "You should rest, Ingrid," he said softly. "You haven't closed your eyes in 2 days." She allowed herself the faintest of smiles. "Perhaps after we sink the convoy." Suddenly the sonar officer's voice cracked through the calm. "Multiple aircraft detected, closing fast." Weiss's head snapped up. "Depth?" "They're descending!" she barked. "Alarm! Dive! Dive!" The klaxon screamed through the sub. Men rushed to their stations, boots clanging on the metal deck. Rolf grabbed the periscope, scanning briefly. Through the churning spray, he saw the black silhouette of a bomber breaking through the clouds. "Aircraft directly above." Evelyn brought the Liberty Belle lower, her eyes fixed on the thin wakes below. "There! 2 surfacing!" she shouted. The bomb bay doors opened with a mechanical groan. "Nora! Suppressive fire!" Nora's fingers clenched the triggers, and the 50 cal machine guns roared to life. Tracers cut through mist and struck the water, tearing splashes of foam across the surface. Julia called out distances. 300 meters! Drop pattern ready!" Evelyn pulled the release lever. A sequence of depth charges fell, tumbling toward the waves. The explosions came seconds later, first muffled, then violent. Plumes of water erupted upward like pillars of glass. Inside, U-421, a sister ship to Weiss's, gauges shattered and lights flickered. The hull cracked under pressure, water rushing in. There was no time for orders, only screams and darkness. Ingrid's submarine shuddered violently as shockwaves rolled through. "Pressure rising!" Rolf yelled. Pipes burst. Overhead, men clung to railings. Weiss steadied herself, forcing calm into her voice. "Level at 100 meters. Maintain bearing." Her eyes darted to the depth gauge, which trembled at the edge of safety. The submarine groaned as though alive, protesting the ocean's crushing weight. Above, Nora exhaled shakily. "Hits confirmed. 2 submarines destroyed. she reported. But no one celebrated. Julia stared at her radar screen, watching 2 blips fade into silence. Her stomach twisted. She wanted to feel triumph, but all she felt was an echoing emptiness. Evelyn, too, felt the weight. She looked down at the sea, now boiling with debris and oil, and whispered under her breath, "God forgive us!" Down below, U-412 fought to stabilize. Rolf staggered toward a ruptured pipe, steam scalding his arm. "We've lost ballast control on the stern section." "Seal it!" Weiss shouted. He turned a valve with all his strength, face contorted in pain. A moment later, the compartment sealed, but a burst of shrapnel, loosened by the explosion, struck him in the side. He collapsed silently, blood blooming across his uniform. Weiss knelt beside him, her gloved hands trembling. "Rolf." "No," she whispered. His eyes met hers, steady even as his breath weakened. "Get them home," he murmured. Then he was gone. For a moment, the war, the noise, the ocean, all ceased to exist. Only silence remained. Weiss closed his eyes, her own face expressionless, but for the faintest tremor in her lips. She rose, voice cold, precise, steel reborn. "Take us deeper." Silent running, no transmissions. The men obeyed, sensing her grief but saying nothing. Evelyn's bomber circled once before turning north. Julia watched the radar until only one faint signal remained, the U-412 limping into the depths. "One escaped," she said softly. Evelyn nodded, her gaze distant. "Let it. We've done enough for one morning." But deep down, she knew the surviving submarine would haunt her. 9 minutes. That was all it had taken. 9 minutes to change everything. As the Liberty Belle disappeared into cloud, Ingrid Weiss stood in the control room of her wounded submarine, surrounded by the stench of oil and smoke, half her crew dead, her heart hollowed by loss. She pressed her hand against the cold steel wall and whispered, "For him, we continue." Above the endless ocean, Evelyn Hart gripped the control yoke, unaware that the woman she had nearly killed had just sworn vengeance beneath the same dawn light. A thin veil of mist drifted across the tarmac at Keflavik Air Station, pale sunlight struggling to pierce through the Icelandic morning gloom. The air was sharp with the scent of salt and fuel. Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Hart stood beside the battered B-24 Liberty Belle, her uniform stiff with cold and her mind heavier than the sky above. The bomber still bore the scars of last night's sortie, bullet holes patched with dull aluminum, a crack across the nose glass like a frozen scar. But what lingered most wasn't the physical damage. It was the silence that followed victory. She had done what she thought was right, yet the faces of the dead haunted her. Every explosion replayed in her head like a broken reel. From across the field, Commander Harris, a tall man in his late 40s with a square jaw, neatly trimmed gray hair, and the practiced scowl of a career officer, approached. His overcoat snapped in the wind as he walked with 2 military police officers in tow. "Lieutenant Commander Hart," he said curtly, stopping in front of her, "you directly disobeyed a standing order not to engage without authorization. I've got a dozen telegrams from command asking why one of our bombers went rogue over the dark corridor." Evelyn's chin lifted slightly, though exhaustion dulled her defiance. "Sir, we detected a coordinated submarine formation. If we hadn't acted, the convoy would have been destroyed. We confirmed 2 kills." Harris's jaw tightened. "You confirmed an incident that could have ended your crew's lives. You're not here to play hero. You're here to follow orders." At his words, something inside Evelyn snapped, a quiet, unseen fracture. "With respect, sir," she replied evenly. "The sea doesn't wait for orders." The MP beside Harris shifted awkwardly, sensing the tension. Harris stared at her for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "You'll face an inquiry. Until then, you're grounded." He turned sharply and walked away, his boots echoing against the frozen ground. Evelyn stood still, the wind tugging at her hair. Grounded. The word rang like a sentence. Inside the radar hut, Lieutenant Julia Stone hunched over the ASV-3 console. Her fingers were steady, but her heart raced. She had spent the entire morning rewriting the data logs. If anyone compared the timestamps, they'd see the signal Evelyn acted on came before the official green light, proof that Evelyn had followed procedure, not violated it. Julia knew it was falsifying records, but loyalty came first. Evelyn had been her mentor, the one who saw potential in her when others dismissed her as the kid from Minnesota. Julia's conscience twisted. She paused, staring at her reflection in the glass of the radar screen. Short, dark hair tucked behind her ear, freckles across her pale skin, eyes that looked older than her 24 years. "If they take her down," she whispered, "they'll take all of us." She hit enter. The false data locked into the report. In the mess hall, Sergeant Nora Mitchell sat alone, coffee untouched. Her hands trembled slightly as she rolled her brother's old dog tag between her fingers. She could still hear the hum of the engines, smell the cordite from the guns. 9 minutes, that was all it took. She should have felt proud. Instead, every time she blinked, she saw the plumes of black water rising where men had died. She looked up when Julia walked in. "Any news?" Nora asked quietly. Julia shook her head. "They're going after her, Nora. Command thinks she acted reckless." Nora scoffed, her voice rough. "Reckless saved our skins. Harris wasn't in the air with us." Julia nodded. Both women sat in silence, the weight of duty and guilt pressing down like the endless northern sky. Far below that same ocean, the world was very different. The U-412 drifted in near silence, her hull groaning against the pressure of the deep. Captain Ingrid Weiss stood at the helm, her face a pale mask in the dim red light. Her blonde hair, tied back tightly, was streaked with oil. Her uniform jacket bore salt stains and smoke residue. The air reeked of diesel and sweat. Around her, the remaining crew worked with grim focus, repairing what they could. Their movements were slower now, each man burdened by fatigue and fear. Ingrid's second-in-command, Chief Engineer Otto Kramer, emerged from the aft compartment, his coveralls blackened, a wrench clutched in one scarred hand. Otto was in his early 40s, built like a dock worker, with a heavy beard streaked gray and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of too many close calls. His voice was gravelly, worn by years of shouting over engines. "We've patched the stern ballast, Captain. She'll hold, for now, but the port battery's fried. We won't make full power until we surface." Ingrid nodded. "Then we stay submerged until nightfall. I won't risk another pass." Otto hesitated. "And the men, Captain? They're scared. Half of them think we should head for Bergen." Weiss's gaze hardened. "We don't retreat." She turned away, staring at the navigation chart. "Rolf didn't die for us to run home." The name hung in the air. Otto lowered his eyes. He had seen the captain's grief, the way her fingers lingered on Rolf's cap before she stored it away. "Understood, Captain," he said quietly. As U-412 crept northward, Weiss's thoughts spiraled inward. Every sound, the creak of steel, the hiss of air valves, seemed to echo in her chest. She saw Rolf's face each time she closed her eyes. The war had taken many from her, but this was different. His death was not just loss, it was an insult. They had been ambushed by an enemy who fought from the sky, invisible and distant. She clenched her fists until her nails bit into her palms. "We will find her," she murmured. "Whoever commands that bomber, she will answer." Back in Iceland, the investigation proceeded swiftly. Evelyn was summoned to the operations office where Commander Harris and 2 intelligence officers waited. One of them, Major Douglas Reed, a thin man with sandy hair, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that never blinked long, handled the interrogation. His tone was almost polite, which made it worse. "Lieutenant Commander Hart," he began, flipping through papers. "Your flight log shows deviation from the authorized patrol zone. Can you explain why?" Evelyn leaned back slightly, her voice calm but firm. "We received a radar signal indicating a wolfpack formation. I made a decision to intercept." Reed raised an eyebrow. "Interesting, because our records show no such detection at that time." A flicker of alarm crossed her face. Had Julia failed to edit the logs in time? "Radar interference was heavy," Evelyn replied, improvising. "It may not have been logged properly." Reed studied her for a long moment. "Perhaps. Still, you understand, Commander, this war is fought on discipline as much as courage." Evelyn met his gaze. "And yet, courage wins the battles, Major." The silence that followed was tense enough to cut. Harris finally intervened. "That's enough for today." Reed closed the folder. "Very well. But this conversation isn't over. That night, Evelyn sat alone in the hangar beside the Liberty Belle. The engines were quiet, the smell of oil thick in the air. She ran her fingers over the bomber's cold metal skin. "You and me both grounded," she whispered. The echo of the sea wind was her only reply. She thought of the men she'd killed, of the submarine swallowed by the waves, and of the voice she imagined might have belonged to its captain, a voice she would never hear, yet somehow could not forget. Far beneath those same waves, Ingrid Weiss stood at the periscope, the dim glow of dials painting her face in red. She stared into the darkness, but in her mind's eye she saw the enemy aircraft. Its silhouette burned into her memory. She whispered softly in German, "Ich werde sie finden." I will find her. The ocean around her seemed to answer with a low, endless hum. Two women, unknown to each other, yet bound by the same storm, drifted in opposite worlds, each guided by ghosts. Above the waves, Evelyn wrestled with guilt and doubt. Below them, Ingrid nursed a fury cold enough to keep her alive. Both were sinking deeper, not into water, but into themselves. The sky over the North Atlantic hung low and colorless. The morning light diffused through a haze of salt and cold. The wind blew in sharp bursts that rattled the metal siding of the radar hut at Keflavik Air Station. Inside, Lieutenant Julia Stone leaned close to the glowing console, her fingers hovering above the dials of the ASV-3 radar. The faint green line swept across the circular screen, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. Then, just as she was about to log the routine sweep, a new blip appeared, small, sharp, and steady. It wasn't the erratic noise of weather interference. It was a deliberate pulse, a presence. Julia straightened, brushing a strand of dark hair from her cheek. Her throat went dry. "Evelyn!" she called, voice tight. Within moments, Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Hart entered, still wearing her flight jacket over a wool sweater, the faint smell of oil and leather trailing her. Her posture was firm but weary, her eyes shadowed from too many sleepless nights. "What is it?" she asked, stepping beside Julia. Julia pointed. "It's been there for the last 4 sweeps. Same bearing, same pattern. It's shadowing us." Evelyn stared at the screen. "A submarine." Julia nodded. "A single one. I ran it through the signature logs. It doesn't match any of ours." Outside, snowflakes began to fall, slow, deliberate spirals that dusted the tarmac in white. Evelyn felt an ache in her stomach, a familiar premonition that something had shifted in the dark vastness of the sea. "Get Nora," she said. "I want all crew briefed in 20. When Sergeant Nora Mitchell arrived, her eyes were ringed with exhaustion. She hadn't slept properly in days. Her blonde hair, usually tied tight beneath her cap, now fell loosely, strands sticking to her temples. She moved like someone fighting through fog, haunted and distracted. Evelyn noticed it immediately. "You're off," she said gently. "You need rest." Nora shook her head, jaw set. "Can't sleep," she muttered. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the Liberty going under, my brother screaming, the water swallowing everything." Evelyn wanted to say something, anything that might help, but words felt hollow. "We can't change what's gone," she finally said, "but we can make sure it doesn't happen again." Nora looked up, and for the first time in days, her gaze sharpened. "Then let me fly." Evelyn nodded. That afternoon, the Liberty Belle took off again into the gray sky. The engines roared, shaking the snow loose from the wings. The crew was tense but silent. Julia manned the radar station, eyes locked on the glowing display. The blip was still there, steady, unwavering, like a predator circling unseen. "It's below and behind us," she said over the intercom. Evelyn adjusted her headset. "Maintain altitude. Keep tracking." The sea below looked deceptively calm, a massive slate of rolling gray, concealing everything. Evelyn felt that same cold ache in her gut. Somewhere under that water, someone was watching. Beneath those waves, Captain Ingrid Weiss stood at the periscope of U-412, her face pale under the dim red glow of the control room. Her uniform collar was open, revealing a silver locket at her throat, Rolf's. Her eyes, ice blue and alert, never left the viewfinder. "Maintain course," she ordered quietly. Around her, the crew moved with silent efficiency, their faces drawn with fatigue. The air was thick with humidity and the metallic tang of recycled oxygen. The sonar officer, Petty Officer Lucas Meyer, a young man barely 20, thin and pale with sharp cheekbones and a nervous energy that kept his hands in constant motion, turned from his console. Captain, surface vessel bearing north, moving slow. Same transmission frequency as before. Ingrid stepped closer. Same aircraft? Lucas nodded. Yes, Captain, the same Liberator. Weiss's lips curved slightly, not in a smile, but in recognition. So she returns. She adjusted the periscope and caught a faint shadow through the distorted surface light above, the outline of an aircraft's wingspan moving across the clouds, the same bomber that had destroyed 2 of her sister boats. We stay at periscope depth, she ordered. Track her, but do not engage until I say. Otto Kramer entered the control room, wiping his hands with a rag. You're pushing the batteries again, he said, his deep voice carrying both concern and quiet defiance. If we stay this shallow too long, we risk being spotted. Weiss didn't look at him. If we dive, we lose her. I won't lose her. Otto frowned, stepping closer. His broad shoulders almost filled the narrow passage. This isn't revenge anymore, Ingrid. It's obsession. She turned sharply, her expression cold. You think I don't know that? Her voice dropped to a whisper. But that bomber took everything I had. If I don't find her, what am I? Otto looked at her for a long moment. Alive, he said simply, and walked away. For hours the U-boat followed. Above, the B-24's engines hummed steadily. Below, the submarine's diesel motors pulsed like a heartbeat. 2 machines circling each other through the void, their commanders bound by unseen tension. Night fell quickly. Evelyn sat at the flight controls, her mind replaying every command she had given in the last mission. She had killed men, hundreds perhaps. She didn't even know their faces. Somewhere out there were families who would never know what happened to them. The war told her she was right, but something in her recoiled from the thought. You okay, Skipper? Julia asked softly from behind. Evelyn didn't answer right away. Sometimes, she said finally, I wonder if the ocean remembers, if it keeps count of the dead. Julia frowned. You can't think like that. If you hesitate, people die. Evelyn gave a faint, bitter smile. And if I don't, people still die. Meanwhile, deep below, Weiss sat alone in her quarters. The rhythmic hum of the engines was her only company. She placed Rolf's locket on the small metal table, opening it with trembling fingers. Inside was a photograph. Rolf, in uniform, his grin lopsided, eyes bright with confidence. He had joined the Navy because of her. She pressed her thumb against the image, whispering, I will finish what we started. Suddenly, Lucas's voice echoed through the corridor. Captain, we intercepted something. Radio chatter on open frequency. Weiss rose instantly and hurried to the communications station. The operator handed her the headset. Static hissed, then faint words emerged. Eagle Base to Liberty Belle. Report grid position. Weiss's eyes widened. It was English. A woman's voice responded, faint but clear. This is Liberty Belle, Sector 9B, maintaining visual patrol. Weiss froze. A woman, a female pilot. That voice, calm, measured, strong. Her expression darkened, anger and fascination intertwining. A woman, she murmured. They sent a woman to kill us. She removed the headset slowly, her jaw tightening. Helm, change course. Keep her in range. Otto looked up from the engine readouts. Captain, what are you doing? Weiss's tone was cold as steel. I want her to hear us next time. Back in the air, Julia frowned at her console. Evelyn, I'm picking up a strange echo on sonar. It's faint but repeating, like they're answering us. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Submarine communication? Maybe, Julia replied, but it's not coded. It's rhythmic, almost like they want us to know they're there. Evelyn stared out the cockpit window into the darkness, stretching endlessly below. The ocean reflected nothing back, just a silent mirror. They're toying with us, she said quietly. In that vast space between sea and sky, 2 women continued their deadly waltz. Evelyn, driven by guilt and duty. Weiss, consumed by vengeance and curiosity. Neither saw the other's face, yet each felt the other's presence, like twin ghosts drawn together by the echoes of the dead. The wind over Keflavik was sharp as glass, cutting through the gray morning fog that clung to the repair hangars like a second skin. Frost still clung to the runway edges, and the smell of oil and salt drifted from the nearby shore. Inside Hangar 9, the Liberty Belle stood wounded but proud, her fuselage scarred with bullet holes patched by dull aluminum plates. Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Hart walked along the catwalk above her aircraft, running a gloved hand over the cold metal. She had slept barely 2 hours in 3 days. Her reflection in the plane's side looked older than 31. Haunted gray eyes, dark circles, a tight jaw that refused to tremble. War had aged her faster than years ever could. "She's held together by prayers and stubbornness," came a voice behind her. Chief Mechanic Samuel "Sam" Dwyer, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a weather-beaten face and coarse black stubble, emerged from under the wing. His hands were black with grease, his blue overalls smeared with oil. Sam was one of those men who seemed carved out of endurance itself, gruff but kind, the sort of father figure soldiers didn't know they needed until they broke. "She'll fly again," he said, patting the plane's side. Evelyn nodded absently. "Even machines get tired," she murmured. Sam gave her a long look, the kind that came from someone who'd seen too many burned-out pilots. "It's not the plane I'm worried about." She didn't reply. The silence between them was heavy with all the words war never let people say. Down the corridor, Julia Stone sat in the communications room, the glow of the radar console painting her pale face green. She'd always been sharp, quick to find humor in tension, but lately her wit had gone quiet. Her dark hair hung loose now, no longer neatly tucked beneath her cap. On the desk before her lay a folder marked "Confidential." She shouldn't have opened it, but curiosity and dread were stronger than fear of reprimand. The file described a new project, the Automated Reconnaissance Initiative, drones, unmanned aircraft controlled remotely. It claimed to remove human error from warfare. Julia's hands trembled as she turned the pages. The implication was clear. Once the system proved viable, manned patrols like Liberty Belle would be obsolete. "Replace the pilot," she whispered bitterly. "Replace the fear, the heart, everything." She imagined Evelyn grounded, stripped of the one thing that gave her purpose. And for a fleeting moment, Julia saw her own reflection in the radar glass and wondered if this was how machines saw the world, cold, efficient, detached. She felt sick. Outside, a faint drizzle began to fall. In her small quarters, Evelyn sat by the window with a pen in her hand. The paper before her was blank, except for the first words, "Dear Mother." She hadn't written in months. Every letter she started turned into a report or a confession she couldn't send. "We took damage again," she whispered aloud, as if her mother could hear across the sea. "But we're alive. We're always alive, somehow." She stopped, her eyes drawn to the stack of mission records beside her, each stamped classified. Lives and deaths reduced to ink and numbers. She wanted to write about the woman she'd seen through the periscope, those eyes, that moment. But how did you explain mercy in a war that rewarded only kills? She folded the blank paper, placed it in an envelope anyway, and sealed it. It would join the others in her drawer, letters never sent. Beneath the Atlantic, Captain Ingrid Weiss sat alone in her dimly lit cabin. The hum of the U-412's engines was faint, more like the heartbeat of a dying creature than a machine. Her crew worked in silence. The smell of diesel hung thick. She stared at the message she had just received from Kriegsmarine Command. U-412 is ordered to scuttle, crew to abandon ship, no surrender permitted. Ingrid read it twice, her hand trembling. "Cowards," she whispered. "You send us to die so the world doesn't see you lose." Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Otto Brandt, entered the cabin. He was 35, lean and tense, his blonde hair matted, his eyes rimmed red from exhaustion. He had been loyal to her since their first patrol, though the war had turned his once jovial nature into cold discipline. "Orders, Captain?" he asked quietly. Ingrid folded the paper. "We will comply, but not tonight." She reached for the small recorder beside her cot, a battered German field radio modified to store short transmissions. She pressed the red button, her voice steady but low. "To whoever hears this, this is Captain Ingrid Weiss of U-412. We have received final orders to scuttle. I will not speak of politics or glory. I will speak of eyes. a pilot's eyes, staring down through fire and storm, and choosing not to kill me. I don't know your name. Perhaps you were Mercy, or perhaps Mistake, but you reminded me that I was human before I became a weapon. Her voice cracked slightly. To you, whoever you are, thank you. She stopped the recording, staring at the machine as if it had become her confessor. Transmit this on frequency 42, she ordered Otto. Unencrypted. Otto frowned. That's open to Allied bands. Good, she said. Let them hear. He hesitated, then nodded. And what of us? Ingrid exhaled slowly. We will head north, to the Arctic shelf. One last patrol. Back in Iceland, Julia intercepted a faint radio signal late that night. It was distorted, half lost in static, but she caught fragments, a woman's voice speaking in German, soft and clear. Julia adjusted the frequency, brow furrowed. Evelyn, she called through the intercom, you need to hear this. Evelyn entered, hair damp from the rain. The transmission faded in and out. A pilot's eyes, not kill me. Human before I became, a weapon. Silence followed. Julia looked up, confused. It's not a distress call, she said. Evelyn's chest tightened. It's her. Julia frowned. The sub? The woman from the periscope. Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. The room seemed to shrink around her, the air thick with unspoken understanding. Julia wanted to say something, to remind her that it was the enemy, but the words died in her throat. Instead, she just asked, What are you going to do? Evelyn didn't answer. She turned toward the window, watching the snow fall in slow, soundless flakes. Maybe, she said quietly, I'll write her back. That night, Evelyn sat at her desk again. The candle burned low, the room filled with shadows. She took out a sheet of paper and began to write, not to her mother, not to her command, but to the woman beneath the sea. I don't know your name. I only know your eyes. If mercy is weakness, then maybe I am weak. But I think mercy is the last proof we're still alive. She stopped, folded the paper, and placed it with the others. A letter never sent, but somehow already delivered. Tom tat tieng viet, trong kun ku Iceland, Evelyn va Julia joy mat voisu, that rang chien tring jang dan loai bokan ngoi. Ki Liberty Belle, sub bithe the boy, hithong jiu kien tu jong. Odwai bien, Ingrid Weiss henjuak len tu satin hung bi mat ki, lai thong jiep kwoi kung, gui toying wai fi kong, nu jan the mang cho ko. Julia tin ko bat juak tin hiu radio, kien Evelyn quiet jin viet mat buk tu kong gui, dan cho ke tu mako chua tungap. Bao kau kiemtra, trung lap noi dung, deo porns de trung lap. Chong ne tap trung, bao noi tem han vet, noi ko jok van han tang, giwa chien tran. Han vet moik swet hien, one chief mechanic Samuel, Sam, Dwyer, name, kwarmain tway, than hin sto hoi, ro quay non, tung met contre, o chien truong, kotin kash jam by den tui. Dua. Lieutenant Otto Brand, nam, 25 toy, dang kao gay, mai tok vang, ngiem engi vet trung than, nhung bi chien trang bao mon han tin. Ben jen noi, viet lien chutoi, chapter, jo dai drazis. 3 Series 2, Han Chi Ngay Dong, Viet English, Voa Moi Mot Han Vat Moi Suksuet Hien Kan Komota Hopli Trong Noi Dong Ben Han Vet Jor, Dang Ve, Nanguai Hin, Tin Cash Vi Du. Nihusara Langway Jamban Hu Now, Dang Berasao, Kewa Gay, Tok Mayu Gi, Landa the Neu, Neui La Jan On Kan Miota Kiko Ken, Rauria, Tin Cash Voi Moengwoi, Kozu Kien Gi Joa Lem, and Huang Tin Cash Kong. Hoak chu chua ne, shu meo ne hu neo, nanguai hin, tuai, neu lan han vot, fuchiken mota jon gian. Jiao kau trien nen ba jiao ve boiken chin, hoak ve thoi tiet. Hong gian kong qua shworik tu, noi dung ho miu ta kitem. Li noi tem han vot, ke tuk chapter hu chi trong, noi dung j tom tat. Chu toi juan tom tate bang tieng viet ki ben duoi. Bao kau kiem tra trung lap noi dung, valiet gain han vat moi new ko. Chapter 7. The Depths Remember Ngai. O 75, 1945, chien tran ke tok. Liberty Belle, tro lai bao troi, jatuan tra koi kung. Evelyn han juosh tin hiu. Esos yu ot o vung bien ma wush for its vidiv tung bi ben trung. Koha Kane Khan Cap Train Met Nuak. Trong Lan Swong, Kon Hin Te Mat Man Vonoi Lan, Kung Made Hope, Jenshua Bang Gi Kwai Kwa Ingrid Weiss. Gyong Weiss Vang Lan Trong Tang He. We were both soldiers. The sea will remember us, even if history won't. Kane Kwai, Evelyn Name, Hui Hiu Kwa Min Shuang Bian, Nhin Mat Nuash Fang Lang, Hain Gwai Pun Nu, He Kithu, Chung Ten Bien Bao Ki Uk, Kua Jai Duong. Chat GPT John Noy. Chapter 7. The Depths. Remember the sky over the North Atlantic was a pale gray sheet, silent except for the low hum of Liberty Belle's engines as the aircraft sliced through the fog. It was May 8th, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. The war was officially over, yet the sea beneath still carried its ghosts. Captain Evelyn Hart sat alone in the cockpit, the glow of the dials reflecting off her tired face. Her eyes were red-rimmed from sleepless nights, her dark brown hair tied back in a simple braid, streaked faintly with the dust of salt air. She had flown through storms, fire, and loss. But this silence unnerved her more than gunfire ever did. She traced her gloved fingers across the dashboard, whispering to herself, "One last flight." Liberty Belle, once the pride of the Atlantic Patrol Fleet, was being decommissioned. Tomorrow, she would be grounded for good. Today was just a final sweep, a ceremonial flight over waters that had swallowed too many lives. Yet as Evelyn passed the coordinates near where U-412 had vanished months before, the radio crackled to life. "Mayday! Mayday!" The signal was faint, warped by static and distance. She froze. Her heart skipped. It was impossible. No transmissions should exist out here. "This is Captain Evelyn Hart, Liberty Belle, responding to SOS. Identify yourself." Static answered her, then a flicker. "Weiss. Ingrid Weiss." Evelyn's blood ran cold. She adjusted the frequency, her fingers trembling. The voice, soft, accented, unmistakable, came again. "The sea remembers. We were both soldiers." Evelyn's throat tightened. She remembered that night. The storm, the fire, the U-boat surfacing like a wounded beast, and the eyes of the blonde woman staring through the periscope, calm even as death closed in. She hadn't dropped the final bomb. She couldn't. And now, somehow, that ghost was calling to her. The radar picked up debris ahead. She lowered altitude, fighting the turbulence as wind tore across the wings. Waves rose like black mountains, crashing against each other with thunderous fury. Then she saw it, metal fragments, jagged and corroded, bobbing in the dark water. The remnants of U-412. Evelyn circled once, twice, then made the decision that no one else would have dared. She brought Liberty Belle down. The landing was brutal. The impact sent a jolt through her body, rattling her teeth. But she held firm. The aircraft floated, half submerged, groaning with strain. Rain lashed against the canopy as she unstrapped herself and stepped out onto the wing. The ocean smelled of rust and memory. She scanned the waves, and there, caught in the eddies, was a small black box sealed in waterproof casing. The marking on it was unmistakable. Kriegsmarine, German Navy. Her breath caught. She pulled it aboard, soaked and shaking, and took it into the cockpit. Inside was a recording device, cracked but functional. She connected it to the auxiliary input. For a moment, only static filled the cabin. Then, slowly, a woman's voice emerged. "If you are hearing this," said Ingrid Weiss, her tone weary but steady, "then I am no longer part of this world. I did not follow my orders. I could not. To destroy is simple. To understand one's enemy, that is harder." Evelyn leaned forward, unable to breathe. The voice continued. "Captain Evelyn Hart, you were the one who spared us that night. You looked through the storm and chose mercy. I did not forget. The sea is cruel, but it listens. It keeps what men wish to erase." A pause, then softer. "We were both soldiers, bound by orders, divided by flags. But the ocean knows no nation. It will remember us, even if history will not." The message ended with a soft click, and silence swallowed the cabin once more. Evelyn sat motionless, tears welling in her eyes. She had spent years trying to harden herself, to bury emotion beneath duty. Yet this voice, a stranger's voice, had cracked open everything she thought she'd closed. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the horizon. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction, gray and infinite. She looked down at the black box in her lap. It was a relic of her enemy, yet it felt more human than any medal or commendation she'd ever received. Slowly, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her pilot's insignia, a silver pair of wings tarnished by salt and time. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she opened the canopy. Wind whipped at her face as she held the insignia over the water. The ocean below seemed almost to breathe, patient, waiting. "You were right, Weiss," she whispered. "The sea remembers." And she let the insignia fall. It tumbled once, through the mist, catching a glint of light before vanishing beneath the waves. Evelyn watched until the ripples faded. The radio remained silent, but somehow she felt less alone. The war had ended, yes, but peace was not just the absence of battle. It was the courage to forgive, even when the world told you not to. When she finally turned Liberty Belle back toward the clouds, the dawn was breaking behind her. The first rays of light spilled across the sea, soft and golden, dissolving the fog. The ocean, vast and ancient, whispered its eternal hymn below. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Hart smiled. The sea, after all, did remember. Tom ta tieng viet, ngaye, 8 1945. Chi chien tran ket tuk, nufikong, Evelyn Hart, thakien chuyen bay, guekung, tren chiets, Liberty Belle. Trong vung bien wayu zwarso dwai tung bijan chem. Konatin hiu, SOS to Ingrid Weiss, nuchi hue, taungam juk, mako tung tamang. Evelyn hakan kankap vatim dai hop jin. Chualoin hankuekwa Weiss. Bien sin ho chungta, dulich sukong. Evelyn nem hui, hiu kwa min, xuong bien, chepnhar hoa bien. Vaki utsgiwa het ngwaifu, nu o het chien tuyen. Chapter 7. The Depths. Remember, the sky over the North Atlantic was a pale gray sheet, silent except for the low hum of Liberty Belle's engines as the aircraft sliced through the fog. It was May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. The war was officially over, yet the sea beneath still carried its ghosts. Captain Evelyn Hart sat alone in the cockpit, the glow of the dials reflecting off her tired face. Her eyes were red-rimmed from sleepless nights, her dark brown hair tied back in a simple braid, streaked faintly with the dust of salt air. She had flown through storms, fire, and loss, but this silence unnerved her more than gunfire ever did. She traced her gloved fingers across the dashboard, whispering to herself, "One last flight." Liberty Belle, once the pride of the Atlantic Patrol Fleet, was being decommissioned. Tomorrow, she would be grounded for good. Today was just a final sweep, a ceremonial flight over waters that had swallowed too many lives. Yet, as Evelyn passed the coordinates near where U-412 had vanished months before, the radio crackled to life. "Mayday! Mayday!" The signal was faint, warped by static and distance. She froze. Her heart skipped. It was impossible. No transmissions should exist out here. "This is Captain Evelyn Hart, Liberty Belle, responding to SOS. Identify yourself." Static answered her, then a flicker. "Weiss? Ingrid Weiss?" Evelyn's blood ran cold. She adjusted the frequency, her fingers trembling. The voice, soft, accented, unmistakable, came again. "The sea remembers. We were both soldiers." Evelyn's throat tightened. She remembered that night. The storm, the fire, the U-boat surfacing like a wounded beast. And the eyes of the blonde woman staring through the periscope, calm even as death closed in. She hadn't dropped the final bomb. She couldn't. And now, somehow, that ghost was calling to her. The radar picked up debris ahead. She lowered altitude, fighting the turbulence as wind tore across the wings. Waves rose like black mountains, crashing against each other with thunderous fury. Then she saw it, metal fragments jagged and corroded, bobbing in the dark water. The remnants of U-412. Evelyn circled once, twice, then made the decision that no one else would have dared. She brought Liberty Belle down. The landing was brutal. The impact sent a jolt through her body, rattling her teeth, but she held firm. The aircraft floated, half submerged, groaning with strain. Rain lashed against the canopy as she unstrapped herself and stepped out onto the wing. The ocean smelled of rust and memory. She scanned the waves, and there, caught in the eddies, was a small black box sealed in waterproof casing. The marking on it was unmistakable. Kriegsmarine, German Navy. Her breath caught. She pulled it aboard, soaked and shaking, and took it into the cockpit. Inside was a recording device, cracked but functional. She connected it to the auxiliary input. For a moment, only static filled the cabin. Then, slowly, a woman's voice emerged. "If you are hearing this," said Ingrid Weiss, her tone weary but steady, "then I am no longer part of this world. I did not follow my orders. I could not. To destroy is simple. To understand one's enemy, that is harder." Evelyn leaned forward, unable to breathe. The voice continued. "Captain Evelyn Hart, you were the one who spared us that night. You looked through the storm and chose mercy. I did not forget. The sea is cruel, but it listens. It keeps what men wish to erase." A pause, then softer. "We were both soldiers, bound by orders, divided by flags. But the ocean knows no nation. It will remember us, even if history will not." The message ended with a soft click, and silence swallowed the cabin once more. Evelyn sat motionless, tears welling in her eyes. She had spent years trying to harden herself, to bury emotion beneath duty. Yet this voice, a stranger's voice, had cracked open everything she thought she'd closed. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the horizon. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction, gray and infinite. She looked down at the black box in her lap. It was a relic of her enemy, yet it felt more human than any medal or commendation she'd ever received. Slowly, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her pilot's insignia, a silver pair of wings tarnished by salt and time. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she opened the canopy. Wind whipped at her face as she held the insignia over the water. The ocean below seemed almost to breathe, patient, waiting. "You were right, Weiss," she whispered. "The sea remembers." And she let the insignia fall. It tumbled once through the mist, catching a glint of light before vanishing beneath the waves. Evelyn watched until the ripples faded. The radio remained silent, but somehow she felt less alone. The war had ended, yes, but peace was not just the absence of battle. It was the courage to forgive, even when the world told you not to. When she finally turned Liberty Belle back toward the clouds, the dawn was breaking behind her. The first rays of light spilled across the sea, soft and golden, dissolving the fog. The ocean, vast and ancient, whispered its eternal hymn below. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Hart smiled. The sea, after all, did remember.